This is our last week in Genesis. So
Yeah.
it's been quite a journey through this book. And so let's just jump in and get to the good stuff here. The conclusion of this book is interesting because, we look at Genesis as part of the Pentateuch, which is the 5 books of Moses. And even in the way Genesis ends, it sets up for Exodus. And so we're going to just roll right into Exodus next week. But it ties well together. Like the people, Jacob's family, they're in Egypt. And we're going to be dealing with the final blessings of Jacob to his sons and to Joseph's sons, and then burial procedures for Jacob and Joseph. And so there's some interesting things that happen in the last few chapters here. And we're going to be starting in verse 47. One of the things we saw last week was, when Jacob finally agreed to go to Egypt, the Lord appeared to him at the altar at Beersheba and said, yes, you are going down, but I will bring you back out after 400 years. And so, so we know what's happening as readers, and now we just kind of see the resolution of the plot for Jacob's family. So let's jump in. Verse 47:1. Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers and their flocks and herds and everything they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said to him, we have come to live here for a while because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen, and if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Which just right here, like this is a very interesting turn of the situation. Like they are, as we saw last week, the Egyptians, they don't like shepherds, and they don't really like the Jewish people. They kind of want to live separately. But here, because of Joseph's influence in the life of Pharaoh, they are elevated almost immediately. Like he says, like, you guys take wherever you want to go, whatever's the best, it's for you. But then also, he put all of his own livestock in charge, like under the care of Joseph's brothers. So very trusting Pharaoh at this point, but he's trusting because he has seen Joseph and his own trustworthy behavior and stewardship of the land. So then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children. All right. And so as we are just kind of looking at some of the interesting little things that are happening here. First of all, they say they're only going to be in Egypt for a while. Like I don't know if Jacob did not tell them the details of his encounter with God at the altar, but they're just saying, we just want to be here for the duration of the famine, essentially. Like we're not trying to take advantage of Egypt and your hospitality. And so they are, also they want to be home just as much as anybody. Like home is a wonderful thing. And so when we see them in Egypt. Like nobody wanted to be there. And I don't think we could really fathom the idea of our family being in another country for hundreds of years, outside of our own home, like because of a famine. So it probably might have been even hard to get their brain around. And so another thing here, we've been talking on Sunday morning about Nehemiah and the people returning from slavery or from exile. And they were in exile in Nehemiah's time because of the sin of the people of Israel. Nowhere in the text do we see the idea of going to Egypt right now as a sin for the people. This is not something that God forbade them to do. And we'll see, and Joseph, as he's describing it, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so in all of this, God is orchestrating the events to get them to Egypt to protect them. So another just very interesting piece here. When Jacob meets Pharaoh, Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is, in theory, the superior person in that meeting. But Jacob took it upon himself to bless Pharaoh. And that we don't know the exact words of the blessing. It could have been simply like shalom, which is a common Jewish blessing of peace. But when we look at the weight of blessing in Jacob's life with his father Isaac, it's not just a word that we would just throw around for the patriarchs. A blessing is a significant deal. And so he blesses Pharaoh when he comes, and he blesses Pharaoh when he leaves. And even as he's talking to Pharaoh, like he is operating in a kind of humility. Like, I'm 130 years old, which is pretty young. And so, Bob, you're a whippersnapper still. So, we are like looking at Jacob, 130 years old, still thinking young. He's had a good long life, but his father and his grandfather lived long lives as well. And so this interaction with Jacob and Pharaoh is pleasant. And so he's like, yeah, take whatever you need. And so they have whatever they need. They're set up for a great future as long as they feel as they're supposed to be in Egypt. So like everything seems to be going great. And we'll see, right away in Exodus, things go okay for a long time, but they don't always stay great. So let's pick up in verse 13. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money that was to be found in Egypt and Canaan in payment for the grain they were buying, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all Egypt came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is all gone." "Then bring your livestock," said Joseph. I will sell you food in exchange for livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their sheep and goats, their cattle and donkeys, and brought them through that year with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was over, they came to him the following year and said, "We cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes? We and our land as well. Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment Pharaoh gave them. That is why they did not sell their land. Joseph said to the people, now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so that you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for your fields and as food for yourselves and your households and your children. You have saved our lives, they said. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh. So Joseph established it as law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. So the famine is so severe that the people of Egypt start selling all of their stuff to Pharaoh. So in the previous section, who was in charge of all of the livestock that Pharaoh owned? Joseph's family. Jacob's descendants were put in charge of all of his livestock. And so here we see there's this elevation of Jacob's family, even in Egypt. Like as the things are getting worse and worse, Jacob's family continues to get more prominence. So they're in charge of everything, all the livestock that belonged to Pharaoh, which becomes eventually all of the livestock, which is interesting. But then it gets worse the next year. And so they sell themselves. The people of Egypt sell themselves into slavery to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh owns all the land, all the livestock, and all the people. And, this is a voluntary entrance into slavery for the people of Egypt. And if you think about this kind of arrangement, like I remember in American history classes learning about indentured servitude, where people would like book passage on a ship from Europe in particular, and they would come over and they would serve for like 7 years on a farm or plantation or something, and then they would work their way off of that debt. That was indentured servitude, and that was an arrangement that was mostly just European migrants coming over. And so when we like look at this kind of thing, it's like it seems like their debt servitude, like it would make sense to think, oh, maybe it's just temporary, but like the text doesn't tell us that they ever are not slaves to Pharaoh. Like they are giving themselves over to Pharaoh in perpetuity. So when you look over, compare in the next few chapters into Exodus, we see that people of Israel become slaves in Egypt as well. And we don't know how all of that happened over time, but they did. And when they are liberated from slavery, they are the law that God gives to the people of Israel puts a hard limit on how long people could be slaves in Egypt, because slavery in Egypt, or in the Promised Land, when they get into the Promised Land, because slavery in Egypt never ended. We also look at like the gift of the Sabbath for the people of Israel is tied to reminders that God saved the people from slavery. Go a little further here. The people are taxed a fifth of all of their produce in the future that goes to Pharaoh. And even in God's law, the tithe that the people are supposed to bring into the temple is a tenth, which is less than a fifth. So all of the commands of the law that God will give to the people, like when you look at it through the lens of what was happening in Egypt and the strictness of the Egyptian laws, like you can see like the law that God gives is a lighter burden for the people than life in Egypt, which is, reading through the law can be overwhelming, and we can think like, man, what a killjoy it is to study the law. But it's there, you contrast it with life before, and you see like, wow, God is actually incredibly gracious as he is helping the people recover and find place in the land that he had promised to their forefathers. And so with Pharaoh now owning all the people, all the land, all the produce, everything is like coming right through Pharaoh. This is a intense government structure that they're putting in place. But let's pick up in 47:27. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. So they're buying property while the people of Egypt are selling their property to Pharaoh. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. I will do as you say," Joseph said. "Swear to me," he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. So Joseph, he is a prominent leader in Egypt, but he still defers to his father. His father, Jacob, is, we see he's about to die, and he knows it. And so he's like, "You've got to bury me back home. I am not supposed to be buried in Egypt. So promise me." And we see this same kind of covenant making that Abraham made with his servant, to put your hand under my thigh, which is like, I trust you to do this. Like, that's a high level of trust to make these kinds of covenant commitments to each other. And as we see, like, Abraham bought some land for his family by the Oaks of Mamre. And so that's where like this burial plot is supposed to be. And so Jacob wants to go back there, and Leah will be buried there. Rachel was buried on the way from Paddan Aram to Canaan. And so she's not going to be buried there, which is, I'm sure, heartbreaking for Jacob when you think about how important home is to him. But he knows his time is short. And so even here, one of the things that is interesting is he leaned on the top of his staff. So you can think about it like he's holding his like walking stick, and he's like can barely like stand and like just leaning over. Another way to translate that word could also be he was leaning over his bed. Like he couldn't even get up, but he's leaning in a way that he's trying to like pay honor to the Lord and worship God. He worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Whereas, in Bible, we see people lay prostrate. Got to make sure I say that right. Like lay on the ground and worship. And so Jacob can't do that. And so he's trying to like lean over his staff, or even like on his bed, just like still trying to do the bowing motion as he's worshiping the Lord. And when we think about the life of Jacob, like he was the deceiver, right? He was a trickster. And here he's trying at the end of his life to honor God, to continue walking in the path of his father and his grandfather. And so he's making Joseph make this promise to him. And Joseph says, I will surely bring you back again. And so in chapter 48, sometime later, Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed, which is great. Rallied his strength. It's like, this is the last hurrah for Jacob. Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your two sons, born to you in Egypt, before I came to you here, will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. As I was returning from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So here we see Jacob is adopting Joseph's sons. So what was, like, if you think about the inheritance, like, plan, like, system, like, the firstborn would get half, essentially, or double, even, like, half or double. There's 12 brothers here, so it's trying to be, maybe he's trying to be fair, but he gets a double portion of the inheritance, because instead of Joseph getting this blessing, Joseph's sons get the blessing. So Joseph basically is doubled through his sons, if that makes sense. So when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth." When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger will become greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." He blessed them that day and said, "In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I'm about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than to your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow." All right. So a consistent theme throughout the book of Genesis is the younger brother taking prominence over the older brother. So Abel was favored over Cain. Seth also then was a line of election after Cain killed Abel and was banished east of Eden. And then we see on down the line, we see Jacob getting the blessing over Esau, and then we see Joseph being the favored son over his 11 brothers. And now even here, Jacob is still working that theme, and he is making Ephraim the more prominent of the brothers, essentially choosing to make him the firstborn of the two. And one of the things that kind of drove me crazy when my kids were young, Judah was not like, he didn't grow very fast for a while, and so Jocelyn actually was like taller than him, like when they were really, really young. Like they're 2 years apart, but Jocelyn like caught up real fast. And so people would often ask, like, is she older or are they twins, which was hilarious to me also. But like as a parent, like you have a certain kind of pride in your kids, and like, this is my firstborn, this is my second, like you have this kind of love for them, and it's a big, full, happy love. But like your firstborn is really a special a special thing. And so for Joseph to watch his dad in his old age, like he probably thought, well, dad's old, maybe he's losing it. And so he's trying to help. But Jacob knows exactly what he's doing. He's like, no, this is what I am going to do, because this reverse blessing of the younger having prominence over the older, it's a family trait, it seems. And so here we are. We have one more reversal of blessing in the family. And so as we look at the kind of blessing, he's tying them back into the blessing of the land and the promise of the land. And the blessing is tying to the family tradition of Abraham, Isaac, like let's walk with the Lord. And so this is Jacob's desire for the sons of Joseph as he's adopting them and giving them the full blessing that Joseph should have received. And then a little bit more blessing too. He says, I'm going to give you the land that I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. And so all of this inheritance is for Joseph's family. And when you look at the map of the people of Israel, Ephraim is essentially the northern kingdom. As you look, like it will, at some point, the two, Israel will divide into Judah, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom. And Israel will be referred to as Samaria, will also be referred to as Ephraim. The influence of that part of the family is so great that it'll just be synonymous with the northern kingdom. Manasseh also has a huge plot of land when we get to the division of the land in months to come. But let's keep going, because verse 49, Jacob is going to bless the rest of his sons in chapter 49. Starting in verse 1. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. And some of this, as I was reading through this, I watched Seinfeld when it was on, and I love that show. And there's this part of Seinfeld where George's dad creates a holiday called Festivus. And part of Festivus is the airing of grievances. And they sit down to the meal, and George says, Frank Costanza says, I got a lot of problems with you people. And so some of that is going to come out in this passage as well. Like it feels like Jacob has some airing of grievances that he's getting out. And there might be some things that the sons, maybe they didn't realize that Jacob knew all that was going on. But here he is telling them what's going to happen. And so, assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel, starting with Reuben. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, turbulent as the waters. You will no longer excel, for you went up unto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. And so as we are looking through, we look back into the story, and as Jacob was getting older, we read a couple weeks ago about Reuben sleeping with Jacob's concubines to try to gain authority in the household, which is weird for us, right? But in our culture, but it was not uncommon in ancient cultures. And Jacob knew this. And so now Jacob is saying, you will not get the blessings that you think you deserve. And Reuben is Leah's first son. And so he's saying to him just flat out, I know what you've done. You will no longer excel. Then he goes to Simeon and Levi, who, if you remember, their sister Tamar was taken and most likely raped by Abimelech, and then they killed the whole town. Simeon and Levi made this plan and executed it. And so his words to Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. And Simeon, when you look at the actual like history, what's going to happen with these two tribes, Simeon will basically be assumed in the southern kingdom of Judah. They're not a very prominent tribe over the history. Levi actually doesn't get any land in the inheritance because they become the priests. And we'll talk more about why the Lord will choose them to be priests eventually. But the Levites had towns in all the tribes, but they were not given the land divisions the same way that other tribes were. And so we are seeing like these things that happen. These are still Leah's kids. These things that are happening to Leah's kids are troubling for sure. But we come to Judah. And so Judah in verse 8, your brothers will praise you. Judah means praises or praised one. And so here there's a little play on words here. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. So here, Judah, he will be praised. His inheritance is tied to rulership. And when you get into the history here with Egypt or in Israel, David was from the tribe of Judah, and David's line of descent is going to be the line of the kings. God will make a promise to David to say, you will always have a ruler on the throne. All of this is a part of God's plan. And ultimately, Jesus, his earthly family, were from the line of Judah. And so we look here, there is this hope for this future king where things will be so prosperous that they can wash their garments in wine. I don't know how it's going to make things cleaner, but the kings of the people will come from Judah until the one for whom it is appointed will come. And so there's this, even beyond the kings, there's a look to potentially a messianic figure that we see hints at. Ultimately, as followers of Jesus now, we look back and we read this as Jesus. All right, let's keep going. Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. His border will extend towards Sidon. And so that it seems pretty like, well, you're just going to live up north and you're going to do fine, Zebulun. So good job. And then Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Issachar could also mean donkey here. And so he's going to have good land, but he's also going to be a laborer. He's going to have some difficulty in his future. And he's going to be up towards the north in the allotment of the land. And so that's a more risky area farther north. That's as we look at the future, when the enemies come from Babylon and Assyria, they come from the north and take the people away. And so Zebulun is one of the first to face the risk there. And then let's keep going. Dan will provide justice for his people. One of the tribes of Israel, Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, Lord. So Dan's name and call were to judge. And so there's a vindicating that happens through the tribe of Dan. But we also see there's some treachery as we look into the book of Judges, Judges 18. And so one of the interesting things as well as we look forward in Israel's history, in Revelation 7, verses 5 through 8, Dan is not listed as one of the tribes of Israel. Yeah. So let's keep going. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. And so, it's one of those things where Dan's going to face conflict, but he will fight back. He will continue to, he's not going to just take it lying down. Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king, and Asher's and produce a notable annual quota for the palace. So Asher actually, his land is going to end up being in a very prosperous area. And so like what we're seeing here is there's going to be a bountiful harvest from them. But because there's a bountiful harvest for them, eventually there's going to be a kingdom in Israel, and they are going to feel that tax that's going to come to the palace, is what the words of Jacob here are. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. And so one of the nicest ones, like, your descendants are great. They speak well. They're beautiful. They are joyful is kind of one of the things to pick up. Then the longest of the blessings is to Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arms stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessing of the skies above, blessing of the deep springs below, blessing of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all the rest of the head of Joseph, let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. And so, Jacob, thought he was never going to see Joseph again. And now here he's saying, looking at the way he talks, like, bitterness led these archers to attack you. Who are the archers? His brothers. They were bitter. They were angry. They were jealous. So they tried to eliminate Joseph, but he remained steady, and he was steady because God sustained him. And so that is the ongoing story of Joseph. Joseph's life is that he was sustained by God through great hardship. And so Jacob is recognizing this. And so as we look, he's set apart from his brothers. And that's one of the things in the law that we'll get to in the coming weeks. There's this thing called the Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow was that men would live set apart lives. And in their being set apart, they would receive a special kind of blessing from the Lord, is part of what the purpose would be. And here Joseph spent most of his life up to this point set apart from his brothers in Egypt. And through his set apartness, it led to more blessing for Jacob's family. He sustained them through the difficulty and through the famine. So one more son, Benjamin, the youngest son, verse 27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning, he devours the prey. In the evening, he divides the plunder. And so one of the things that you read this is like, that sounds pretty intense, but the evening he divides the plunder is one of the things we can read from that, is that he shares with the pack. Like, the pack is his family, his brothers. And so even though he is, intense as a ravenous wolf, this is supposed to be read positively as a blessing. He's dangerous, but he also is sharing at the night as he divides the prey. So These are the blessings that he gives to, or the final words that Jacob gives to his sons. They're kind of a mixed bag. Some are positive, others are like, wow, he was really upset at these guys. And for good reason. There were these people, the family of Jacob were far from perfect people. They had many struggles. And so Jacob here is noting this at the end of his life. Let's keep going. Verse 28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him. Then he gave these instructions: I'm about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. Then Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons. He drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in the service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming, and the Egypts mourned him for 70 days. So he's giving those instructions like, take me home, bury me at home. And even this embalming process, like this is not something that we see in Abraham or Isaac. This is something that Joseph is doing as an Egyptian practice, but partly because he wants the embalming was intended to preserve the body. And so he wants to bring a body home to bury. And so the embalming is actually going to help make that happen. And while Jacob was in Israel or in Egypt for 17 years, in some way, the people of Egypt found a way to revere him, and he was respected and was mourned for 70 days. And it could just be his relationship to Joseph. And so they're like, well, Joseph's sad, so we're sad. But it could be that Jacob was also loved by the people. So in verse 4, when the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, if I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him my father made me swear an oath and said, I'm about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go and bury my father, then I will return. Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he made you swear to do. Which, if you are, reading forward into Exodus, Pharaoh in Exodus does not have this same kind of leniency with the people of Israel. Here, this Pharaoh is saying, do what you need to do. You're free to go. In Exodus, he'll say no again and again and again. So Joseph went to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of the court and all the dignitaries of Egypt, beside all the members of Joseph's household, and his brothers and those belonging to his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and herds were left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with them. It was a very large company. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad near Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. When the Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning and the threshing floor of Atad, they said, the Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning. That is why that place near the Jordan is called Abel Mitzrayim. So Jacob's sons did as he commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt together with his brothers and all the others who had gone with him to bury his father. So this is a huge procession of people going into Canaan. And when we, if you think about the 418 soldiers that Abraham had to fight against the kings of the east, like that's a lot of people. This is probably even more people coming into Canaan to bury one man. And so it was noticed by all of the residents of Canaan. This is a significant event. And so he is, they do a lot of repeating in this story, but I think the repeating is there because it is so significant for the history. All right, one more section to read. Verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. That is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God your father." When their message came to Joseph, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. One of the interesting little things here is, like, we don't actually have any evidence that Jacob told the brothers that they should tell Joseph to forgive them. So little moment here where the brothers are acting on their own. Could Jacob have told them this? Sure. Regardless, the response to Joseph and his interaction with his brothers is like, "I forgive you." And in this way, we see throughout the Old Testament, there are moments where we have these little hints of grace that we see fulfilled ultimately in Jesus. And this is one of those moments where Joseph, they tried to kill him, and he was sustained and essentially resurrected in Jacob's mind, and through this journey that Joseph went on, he saved many lives. And ultimately, all of this is because of God's goodness. And so Joseph is saying, "God did this. I forgive you. I'll take care of you." Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also, the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So they did not take him right away to be buried with his father, but they will take him when we get to that point in Exodus. They will get his bones and they will bring him up. But this ongoing request to be buried in the land that God had promised is because home is so tied to the people of Abraham's family. Like this is where we need to be, and where they want to spend, like, to be buried, to be gathered to their fathers. It's like literally go be buried next to your father, is a literal sense. And then spiritually, like this idea of eternity and where the dead go is, they are early understandings of the afterlife. Like they are going to be with their fathers in some kind of spiritual sense as well. And this is going to be developed more throughout the history of the people of Israel. But yeah, so we see a bit of a cliffhanger here. Like, yes, he dies in Egypt but they don't leave Egypt. And so that's where Exodus will pick up next week. So Genesis, we did it, guys. We did it. Any questions on all the stuff that we covered this week? Any questions on Genesis in general as we are wrapping it up?
I have a question about Pharaoh. Was he a young man or young boy when Joseph came around to be his father?
The text doesn't give us Pharaoh's exact age. And so, the text says he was made like a father to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And so it could be like a kind of like
Older.
the vizier role of even a regent overseeing Pharaoh. That could be a possibility, or it could just be his influence over Pharaoh, regardless of age, was so significant that it was like a father. So, so we can't know for sure. That's one of the hard things about the Genesis record is people try to date which Pharaoh it could have been, and when that could have been. But the Pharaoh records and the Israelite records don't always match up perfectly, and as far as like years go, and so it's hard to know which Pharaoh specifically he could have been working with. And so if we don't know which one specifically, we can't really say like, well, he was this old when he became Pharaoh, and then how old was Joseph? So, yeah.
Well, I wondered with the abilities that Joseph had given to him by Pharaoh, if he wasn't an older person where Pharaoh realized he had a little more intelligence than a younger person, because he gave him a lot of freedom.
Yeah, he was second in the whole empire to Pharaoh. And like it, even as you read through these things, like Joseph says, like, I would like this for my family. And Pharaoh's just like, sure, sounds good. It's like, this doesn't happen. So, so he could have been older, like Pharaoh could have come into the throne at a young age, maybe, but we can't know for sure at this point.
Yeah. I just wondered.
Yeah, that's a good question, Sandy. Like when you try to think through, like cause when we read the Bible, we should read with a kind of imagination to help picture the story. Like we don't want to just make stuff up, but we want to read in a way where we think, okay, this could be what's going on. And if the text doesn't specifically tell us, then letting our I'm not trying to say just making things up, but letting our imagination kind of fill in the gaps can be a good thing as long as it's in line with what Scripture is telling us. And so it's not like, we don't want to just go into crazy leaps to say like, well, Joseph was his father, like that kind of thing. Like, no, Pharaoh was not Joseph's kid. It's a metaphor. So let's make sense of the metaphor. So, yeah.
But I could see a young man giving in to other people where an older person would say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that is also interesting when we think about Pharaoh is the title of the king of Egypt. And so it's not a person's name.
Right.
And so even the Pharaoh, when we think about Joseph, he is giving the interpretation for the dreams for the cupbearer and the baker, right? Like, what if they actually did kill a Pharaoh and the next Pharaoh is the one who actually carried out the execution?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so like this is what like I did when I talk about reading with a kind of like biblically informed imagination. Mm-hmm. When we get to the Exodus, the last of the 10 curses, and we'll get to this when we get to it, but the last of the 10 curses is killing the firstborn. So who is the firstborn in Egypt? Pharaoh. So like did that Pharaoh who said no to Moses, did he die? And then his son took over and said, just go already. Like that kind of judgment from the Lord on Pharaoh, like that's intense.
It could be.
So like if the Pharaoh, the firstborn Pharaoh died, and then they leave, and then days go by, and then the new Pharaoh finally is like, what are we doing? We're letting our workforce go get them. And that's when the army goes out. But already Israel has had a head start to get to the Red Sea. Like there's a lot of things that could be happening that like we might not see just in a cursory reading of the text. But as we like kind of dig into like the implications of the death of the firstborn is a pretty big deal. So yeah. But I have not found anybody who validates that claim that I just made. FYI, I haven't, like that's one of those. That might be Jason just being a little crazy. I can fully own it, but I can also see how it could work. So
yeah.
But wouldn't it have been the second born of Pharaoh?
Yeah,
it would have been the second born who probably never considered he would be Pharaoh, because his older brother died with the firstborn and his father died with the firstborn. So all of a sudden he's in power.
Yeah. It would be a tremendous upset to the whole kingdom. So even like, yeah, that's kind of thinking is like one of those things where it's just like, that would break a country.
Yeah.
And that's just 2 people who died. But like, we are not told like there's an age limit for firstborn in that last plague.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
wow, I never thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah. The Bible is intense when you start like, when you like see implications beyond just like, it's already sad if all the firstborn sons died, like as just kids, but then like beyond that. But why did that happen? Because Pharaoh refused to let the people go. And the text will tell us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that the Lord could show his power.
Whoa.
So yeah, Exodus gets intense. So yeah. Anyway, there's this meme going around where this guy is like on a conspiracy wall, and it's like so there's a guy like with a coffee shop like reading his Bible is like what I think I look like in Bible study, and then the next one is like what I actually look like in Bible study with this conspiracy wall with all the strings and all this stuff happening. That's how I feel sometimes. Like I feel like I'm just opening the Bible and just like, isn't this interesting? And then there's other times where I'm just like, isn't this crazy?
Yeah.
So yeah. Any other questions? I do love these blessings. Jacob's airing of grievances to his sons, and like finally tells them what's up. And most of his interactions with his sons, he seems fairly passive until right here, when he's finally saying like, "You are terrible, Simeon, Levi. Why did you do that? Reuben, how dare you?" It's pretty intense language. So
he saves it all to the very end.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's what I did.
Oh, Sandy. What I was going to say is, moral of the story: let's practice open communication with our children and our family members, and it's not
Well, don't just hold it in and air it at the very end. Okay, guys, This is what you did wrong.
Yeah, that's probably not the best way. Just because it happened in the Bible doesn't mean that's how we should do it.
Well, I found it funny in this story. You know how last week I was saying, well, I wonder if that story ever came out about what the brothers did. Well, then finally here at the end here, they're like, oh, what if? I'm like, should have thought of that before.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all like freaking out because Joseph had every right to vengeance. And so the brothers are terrified of Joseph.
Yeah.
I know.
He is the second most powerful person in the world, and he knows what they did.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, yeah, you would be afraid of him too. And like the grace that he gives to his brothers, that is so undeserved. It's like, it is a beautiful picture of the gospel and what Jesus has done for us. Right?
Sure. Foreshadowing.
And it is, yeah. Joseph is like the best person in the whole book of Genesis. Like so many other, like Abraham wasn't great. Moses, I don't know, Noah had issues. Noah's kids had issues on down the line. And then Joseph here he shows us what actual righteousness looks like, but it's a righteousness that's formed through hardship.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he's the one that we should try to be more like. So,
okay. All
right. Well, you guys, next week, Exodus. So if you have the time to read through Exodus, you know, and you want to read ahead, go for it. And at least maybe read through chapter 20, which is where we get the 10 commandments. They finally get to Mount Sinai. And then after that, the law happens, and there's a lot of law. So heads up. But we'll get to that, and it'll be good. The law is beautiful, and it shapes our lives. And when we get to the heart of the law, it can be really formative day to day, even now. So, yeah. So I'll see you guys next week. Yeah, and have a great night. Happy birthday, Bob.
Yeah.
Happy
Thanks,
birthday.
Jason.